The Nomiki Show.
There's one thing that's true. It's Rose McGowan is spicy, and she made some news. Rose McGowan, of course, was, I believe, the first woman, or I shouldn't say the first woman. I'm sure he went after many women, but she was, I believe, the first actor to step up and speak out against Weinstein, if not one of the most vocal women who spoke out against Weinstein. And she was not believed. So let's play this clip of Rose McGowan.
And I do believe Democrats, most especially, are in a deep cult that they really don't and know about and aren't really aware of. And I leave the Republicans alone more because I do respect people more that are like, this is what we are, this is what we're about, this is what we're against. Whereas I find that the Democrats are really pretty much almost against all the same things. They're against changing the world for the better, and they're for keeping a system in place in a cult too.
On the Nomiki Show, we are able to have two thoughts in our heads at the same time. So Democrats, I don't know which Democrats she's talking about, meaning the DNC, the establishment, every Democrat. Does that include AOC? Does that include Cori Bush? I don't know. But what I will say is that host, Tammy Bruce, is a former Democrat who, once she got her Fox contract, turned Republican. So it's an interesting scenario there. All right, Piper.
Yeah, I have a couple bones to pick with us, although, I understand the general sentiment that Democrats put up a facade about being progressive and having the interests of the working class in mind, which of course we know isn't true. As I believe we've mentioned on the show.
Don't say the quiet thing out loud, Piper. Come on.
I know. I take issue, first of all, with the fact that you never have to hand it to Republicans. I don't have any particular respect from them just because they're so upfront about their vitriol and hatred for working people, for people of color, for women, et cetera. We all know the list and it goes on and on. I think that, the statement that we've just heard in a way hits the strategy of the Democrats and the Republicans against each other. I think the Democrats are very clear-eyed and very aware of what they're doing. And I think that the way they work operates in tandem with the way that the Republicans are upfront about the fact that they're, again, incredibly hostile to working class progress. And even then, I think the Republicans often use an extremely demented, twisted message about class to make it seem as though they're for the working people, when we know that that's not true either. So, while I understand with the basic sentiment here, and I agree with it, I also think that what we're really looking at is the parties working pretty closely together, or at least understanding how the other operates in order to keep elites in power.
I mean, how amazing would it have been, Simon? We're getting some feedback. Do you have a headset maybe? How amazing would it have been, Simon, if we heard her say very simply, Democrats are just like Republicans. If she's going to play that game, why shouldn't she just say, Democrats are just like the Republicans, and mic drop and leave?
Yeah, I mean, that would have been pretty great, wouldn't it? And that's really the heart of it too. It's as Piper was talking about. We never have to hand it to Republicans. Like, if we were going to say Democrats are, bad or like in a cult, right? We could say the same about Republicans, and we ought to. It's most appropriate to say that we live in like effectively a one-party system that serves capital, And I mean, the cult is not maybe a word that I would have chosen to use, just because it's super loaded. But I think of what sort of Mark Fisher described as capitalist realism, right? Which is like this widespread notion that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but it is now also impossible to even imagine a coherent alternative to it. Right. And I think people who buy into that notion and who celebrate people like Elon Musk and imagine that he's going to like save us from climate catastrophe, like these sort of delusions, there's like a cult-like feeling to it. But yeah, I think just acknowledging that both parties are adherent to this crazy ideology is really that's the root of it.
And what really struck me was, as much as she has been publicly demonized, and I don't want to discount her experience in stepping forward, and maybe that has framed some of this narrative for her based on her experience. People get into electoral politics for their own reasons, based on their own experiences. They get into the progressive movement or different movements for their own reasons. But what was very odd about this one is it felt very privileged. You know, how can somebody post-Trump era, knowing he took a wrecking ball to society, to any sort of democratic institutions that were slightly functional, whether it's the courts or, I mean, we just covered a really big story, and I'm curious how that would have gone down in recent years with different judges. With that being said, how could you ignore the border? How could you ignore the fact that the police unions supported Trump and all of his cronies? And I'm not saying that the Democrats wouldn't have done similar things, but what I'm saying is it was such a point of white woman privilege, and I say that as a white woman, for that to come out of your mouth on Fox News was, I think it was dangerous. I think it was ill-conceived, and frankly, I don't even know if it had the right, if the right intentions were there, because there's a lot of language you could have gone into Fox News saying. I probably, as I have before, criticized the Democrats on Fox News, but then equally called Tucker Carlson a racist, or whatever. There's lots of ways you can rhetorically come at it.
The Nomiki Show.